design, low-code aircraft carriers, speedboats. I'm Andrew Hogan. I'm the head of insights at Figma. And today, I'm sharing a conversation I had with Rob Koplowitz, who's a former VP principal analyst from Forrester, has a multi-decade career from IBM and Microsoft, and is the person I go to with all kinds of questions like this. Rob tells us what designers need to think about with low-code, the way that organizations should be deploying and thinking about low-code as well, and, well, maybe how a specific company is behaving differently in order to better use digital design and all those kinds of things. I'm told I can't say digital transformation anymore, but we did it anyway. This is an extension of a series we do inside Figma called FigBrew, where we bring in outside experts, we have conversations internally about current events and other things happening, and we thought you might want to hear about it too. So, hope you enjoy and let me know what you think. Rob, we are here because you and I talk all the time, and I said, Rob, you got to come on this podcast. And one of the things you seem to always be telling me is that the world has changed. And I actually found a quote from you from 2020 about how applications are being deployed differently during COVID. What do you mean? What are you talking about here? How is this stuff different now?
I think that we have all gotten used to kind of what we would kind of think of as big bang deployments, right? You know, you got a big system, you're going to deploy it, you're going to buy a big piece of software, or you're going to bring in the systems integrators, and the systems integrators are going to fix some massive problem in your organization. And that's cool, right? I mean, I actually don't think that's a problem. I think that's good stuff to do. But I think about it like it's a little bit like turning the aircraft carrier, right? You're going to have this massive effort, you're going to have this massive lift, and it's going to change one part of your business, right? And I think we need to think about this much more deeply. I like to think about it in terms of, it's not really so much like moving an aircraft carrier. It is, how do you get 5,000 speedboats to turn in unison? How do you give everybody the ability to start thinking about running the business more effectively, but do it in a way that is considerate, in a way that is consistent, in that way that meets your business strategy, meets your business goals? This is hard to do. So I think at the gist of this, Andrew, at the center of this is we're all going to become business developers. We're all going to have a role in automating and optimizing how our business runs. And that's going to be for employees. That's going to be for patients in a healthcare setting. It's going to be for citizens in a government setting. It's certainly going to be for customers. But we have to start thinking about these thousands and thousands of things that we do each day that many still involve paper. Many involve spreadsheets and email. How do we start to bring those things into managed platforms? How do we start to drive efficiencies, drive cost out of how we do these things, but also drive effectiveness, have better outcomes for the people that we're trying to serve? So, you know, ultimately what you end up with is this idea that we all become developers, right? We all have a part in developing software and in optimizing how our organization runs.
Rob, I wholeheartedly reject the idea that I am a developer. And I don't know if I'm even comfortable with that sort of perspective. And I talk to a lot of designers, I talk to a lot of product managers. I don't know if they would think of themselves as developers. So maybe give an example of where there is some accidental development that I am doing, or that your sort of average knowledge worker is doing.
Can I answer this question twice? I'm going to answer it once, and then I'm going to 100% contradict myself after that. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
All right. So you're kind of a developer, right? You have spreadsheets that you're able to track things on. You're able to build things on. You're able to do calculations. You probably put those into emails. You send them around. That's kind of starting to go like a process. We've given you some rudimentary tools to actually automate certain parts of your life. So kind of you are a developer, right? And you probably get frustrated that these tools are not particularly effective. So, essentially what we're talking about here is giving you better tools, and tools that aren't just there to serve you, but actually serve the entirety of the organization. So you kind of do know how to develop. So that's the answer number one, is you kind of are already doing that.
So I am a developer.
You are a potential developer, right?
A budding developer. Can I put that on LinkedIn?
Yeah, well, sure. Why not? What do I do?
You suddenly did. So you said you're going to contradict yourself. I am no longer a developer now.
You're a person who does the job and does it with the tools that we've given you to use for a very long time, probably your entire career. Sadly, not my entire career. These things came into being while I was already in the workforce. But now we say, okay, Andrew, I want you to build software applications. I want you to build workflow applications for how your design project moves from idea to implementation, right? There's a whole bunch of things that you're tracking in that spreadsheet. I'd like you to build an application. I'd like you to build a piece of software. No, you don't want to do that, right? That's not my job. It's not your job. And so the contradiction here comes in that we're already thinking in these terms. We're already doing a lot of work to try to make our jobs better and more easier and leveraging technology to do it. But I'm going to have to convince you to be a developer, right? I'm going to have to teach you to use new tools, to say this is part of your job. This is why you should maybe take time away from some of the other things that you're doing periodically in order to follow this endeavor. Can I step back and just do the old guy thing for a second here?
Sure.
We don't need to type. People used to do typing for us, right? We didn't have word processors, and it was hard for us to make that part of our day. We didn't do accounting on our own. We had accounting departments, and they had ledgers, and they had things, and then we got spreadsheets, and we did it on our own. We didn't do design on our own. We certainly didn't do things like presentation materials. That all has become part of our job, in the last 30 years. And I think this is an evolutionary step forward, right? But it's not one that I think we can think is going to be easy. I think this can be a great deal of change management in order to get you, to coerce you along into this new way of working.
Rob, one of the things you've said to me before, and we're talking today because you and I worked together for, I don't know, a handful of years at Forrester. And then, before that you were at IBM and I think Microsoft, and you've had like a Oracle, like a 40-year career looking at these things, watching them change. And one of the reasons we're talking is that, you told me, well, like we developed all of these essential digital interactions and apps around the 2020 COVID outbreak. This article that actually brought this conversation forward is about a deployment in the state of New York. Like, tell me a little about that and a little about like why I, as someone who doesn't think of myself as a developer, should sort of like pay attention. Is that what you mean by you need to convince me to think this way and become more of a developer?
Ultimately, let's talk about 2020 first. So let's talk about some new age development tools that have been around. Honestly, they've been around for a very long time. This concept of low code and even no code has been around for a long time. People built thousands and thousands of applications, some of which were very complicated and mission critical, on Lotus Notes. That was a low code, unambiguously a low code development platform that was embraced by citizens. So it's nothing new. But if we think about sort of the big bang development paradigm, and then we think about what happened in 2020, we all went home, right? Everything that we were doing that required passing a file folder from someone to someone else, everything that required going into a conference room at the same time, anything that required something coming through the mail room, those were gone. Think about healthcare, think about government, think about how you applied for permits or how you paid, for government, for different.
The exchange of papers, you mean, essentially became
exchange papers. Think about what did a workflow look like in a healthcare environment? You were handed a clipboard, you filled it out, you picked it up, you carried it to another window. I'm not touching that paper. You touch that paper. And by the way, get your pile away from me. I don't know what you're blowing on me right now.
Yeah.
Everything changed overnight. And all of a sudden, we had to build applications to do this. We had to streamline these processes. We had to automate these forms. We had to build these workflows. And there was absolutely no way we were going to do the aircraft carrier version of this, right? If you think about here in the U.S., a U.S. example, we had a PPP loan program for small businesses to keep them afloat. That had to be fully online and fully automated. If you are a small regional bank and you were not prepared to do that, you had 3 weeks to get it online. You did not have 6 months or a year to get it online.
And those are programs. Like those are programs, applications,
software programs, right?
Yeah.
Big software programs, mission critical software programs. The healthcare ones were mission critical software programs. COVID tracking applications, employee tracking applications, all these things had to be brought online extremely quickly. And so most of the organizations that we work with embraced these low-code tools that allowed you to do it. You could build it on a declarative environment, application integration, data integration was all much easier, and they could be built in.
When you say declarative, that means I want this to be here. I want this to be like visual, like a sort of what you see is what you get platform.
Ironically, something that a designer would probably really like, right? In terms of a way to build things.
But you're more limited, right? Like, so you're limited. You could put the pieces together. The data though is already connected. And as we all know, connecting the data is sometimes the hardest part.
Building the screens can be really hard. We would refer to them as a design palette. So we're really starting to try and think more the way a designer would think. So here's the thing. These apps worked. They didn't fall over, right? They actually proved themselves to be perfectly capable to be used in a mission critical environment. So you could build faster. You didn't have to build the old fashioned way. The requirements gathering was completely different. You built something, you looked at it, you reacted to it, you iterated upon it in a live application environment, not using wireframes per se, but actually the application. So that's sort of a big step forward. These things prove themselves, but now we're standing on the doorstep of, I can use these tools. Andrew, you may not think you can use these tools. You can use these tools. You could learn them way faster than you learned Excel, right? So if there was an opportunity for you to say, I think something could work better, you could embrace these tools, you could work with them, and you could probably deploy it in a matter of hours, right? So that's extremely powerful, right? Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about taking all those spreadsheets, all those things that are hindering my business, and bringing them online into a managed platform.
All that paper that goes from person to person.
Doesn't go from person to person in a hybrid work environment because they're only coming in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? So
another opportunity. So these applications were stood up in this totally different way.
Yep.
They didn't fall over. I have to did we lose something in doing this? Just like my employer is Figma. And Figma has, is very good at helping people to sort of iterate quickly and collaboratively and together.
Right.
It sounds like you're describing a situation where there's maybe some steps that are combined. There
might be some steps combined, and I think there's a couple ways to think about this. And I think that if I can characterize Figma, and you tell me if I'm doing something wrong here.
Sure.
Figma has thrived in sort of the most critical application environments, right? The application absolutely positively have to be done right. And those aren't going away, right? So sometimes I'll use the analogy of, you buy your furniture for your living room and your dining room in one place. We're in San Francisco. You go to room and board to buy that stuff. Everything else is from IKEA, right? We have to have furniture. It has to be there, but we think about it a little bit differently. Those classic Figma applications aren't going anywhere. They're absolutely going to continue to be built in primarily the same way, deployed in primarily the same way. But we're talking about a long tail of a lot more applications.
Yeah.
This is where I get excited about where Figma would play a role in this, which is, those applications have to be done right too, right? Those applications can't be done poorly. Just because it's IKEA doesn't mean, bed can break and the kid gets hurt, right? They have to be done correctly. And I think that one of the things that's really missing in this and is critical in this is if we're going to build a lot more applications and they aren't being done by professional developers working closely with professional designers, how do we ensure that those applications are usable? How do we ensure that those applications are enjoyable? How do we make sure that they get embraced and that they get full value? I don't know the answer to that necessarily, but I think that Figma is part of it.
Just for the people watching, no announcements, nothing else to share there. Rob, he's got an opinion about where we should go.
And I got an opinion about almost everything.
You saw me do sort of a fake, because, I think no one wants to hear that designers would be less involved or like a platform that helps support, a collaborative design process with lots of people. But I think you're bringing up a really important point about the difference between the number of applications that have to be built, the difference between applications that are, maybe should remain battleships. They should remain aircraft carriers.
Yep.
They should remain something that gets, huge team attention, lots of time, huge amounts of iteration. And then there are these other ones that we're still sort of figuring out how to do well. The solution is not to build them the same way or to design them the same way or to do the process in the same way. The solution is to think about, could we use a design system to support it? Could we take some of the things that we learned and make it collaborative, but still try to go faster in the places where...
If you and I were still at Forrester, we would go in a conference room and we would start putting up on a whiteboard. It says, how do we take as much as we can out of the best practices for those hero applications that we know how to build very, very well and scale it? What would we do? What tools would we use? What processes would we use? What best practices would we use? What frameworks would we have to use to scale that to 1,000, 2,000 applications over hundreds of new developers and designers?
So wait, actually, I want to get a sense of scale here. So you're describing like how many of these sort of like the ones that get the apps that get the most attention versus how many other ones sort of exist? Like, what's your sense of scale at an average organization?
It's difficult to say the scale today would probably be several hundred to one, right? Of these new age apps.
Several hundred of these new age applications to these like one or two of these.
For each one of my, my classic customer facing critical applications, hundreds. But I think we're very early in this. And I think the answer is going to be more likely thousands and potentially tens of thousands of these things. And when I think about it sort of at its most highly scaled version, it's almost starting to replace quite a number of the spreadsheets in my organization. That's kind of how I think about it in terms of scale.
So spreadsheets to applications.
Yeah, huge scale.
So that's really fascinating. I haven't heard you sort of do that like an analysis before, and
it's not real enough.
We're closing this, Rob. We're closing this right now. No, but I get
finger in the air.
I get,
but it would be interesting. It would be an interesting thing to actually analyze.
So one to 100, and then potentially getting to 1 to thousands, and the spreadsheets are sort of the progression that we're on. If you have a spreadsheet,
the pot at the end of the rainbow, kind of, how far could this go? I think it's 1 to hundreds. I think an organization that has embraced these tools and is using them effectively has deployed hundreds of applications on top of these platforms for every one of their more traditional applications.
So before we go to the next topic, give me an example of maybe a couple examples of these kinds of applications that organizations have embraced and started building in maybe a different way.
Can I tell a story about my daughter, or is that too self-serving?
I mean, go for it.
Yeah. All right. So my daughter's new in the workforce. She's 25 years old. She's been with the company for 3 years. She works in a marketing organization. She does marketing operations and campaign type of work. And so she looked at how the company was running campaigns. Her portion of the campaign work took about 10 days. It touched Asana, it touched Marketo, it touched Salesforce.
So all these data sources.
All these different data sources across 10 different campaign regions, each of which did everything their own way, all of which funneled across my daughter's desk, right? And so the variation in the process, some were effective, some were wrong, some were ineffective, they were all inefficient. So she takes a look at it and she says, look, this is how we do it. We build the campaign in Asana, we feed it into Marketo, we have certain steps along the way that require approvals, we have certain assets and artifacts that are gathered for the campaign outside of any of our core systems. We've got a whole bunch of workflows and approvals that have to happen. And then we have results that are coming back from Marketo and getting fed into Salesforce. And we have metrics that are coming out of Salesforce that have to come back in. It's a process, right? So she gets everybody on the same page with a process mapping and documentation tool. We're going to do it one way across the entirety of the organization. That's fantastic. That's great. And off they go. And then she simply worked largely on her own, but with the help of IT, to automate the process using a basic citizen developer workflow engine that connected all the systems that had one consistent process. And now everybody works in the same consistent process. It didn't take very long, right? And she has, dozens of those that she's worked on. I'm not going to do this badly anymore. It takes up too much of my time. We have to automate this. We have to make this build on top of an optimized process, because otherwise it's going to drive me crazy. So think about where that lives in an organization, whether it's a departmental request for leave or some sort of.
Those are all applications. So I think that's the thing I think people don't always understand is the applications that are being created. They don't always look like, your Airbnb app.
No.
They're like potentially a form that populates something from another place. It's an application that takes things from one place to another once you click a button, but it knows which place to take it to depending on the button that you click.
Yeah, and the button, I approve of it, or I've added this additional information, or I've created this document and stored it here. And there's sort of two things, Andrew. One is these smaller situational applications that were below the radar. They were smaller than the aircraft carriers, so we just never did them. So everybody did the best they could with spreadsheets and email. The other one is connecting things across different silos, right? So different silos, then we have things that happen over here in Salesforce. We have things that happen over here in SAP, and things that happen over here in Marketo. And they aren't necessarily connected the way my company uses them in terms of an end-to-end workflow. So, these are also things where you can connect these systems fairly easily and create net new workflows that work across them. But everyone has a person touching it, right? So when Sarah builds these applications, there are forms, there are approvals, there are things that people have to open and look at and say, this is terrible, right? This is unworkable. One of the stories that I like to tell is a number of years ago when we kind of started thinking about this. There were some systems out there that were already doing these things, and people began to tap into the power, and they would do things like the classic I've mentioned many times. You put a purple font on a black screen, you can't do that. You never put a submit button on the bottom of the form, right? It needs a submit button, and now the help desk doesn't know what the heck you've deployed or where it came from or why it's here. And so this consistency in terms of, I'm an employee, somebody has deployed a net new application. I want to be able to immediately calibrate to what it is, what I'm supposed to do with it, how I'm supposed to work with it, what's required of me. And we just aren't thinking about that.
Sounds like design. So that's the thing.
I like design. I wonder if there's a design firm that could get involved in something like this.
So I think one of the things that's super interesting here is that like do people using these applications not deserve a good experience? Would they not save time? Would they not feel better about their job? And I think to some extent in where this has gone to date, that hasn't been the focus. The focus has been put the application out there, make it work, make sure that it gets things correctly from point A to point B without always thinking about the usability, the quality of the experience, and, frankly, whether they like their job or not. There's just a huge improvement from not using a spreadsheet to get it from here to here, spreadsheet and email. Do you think that's a fair kind of characterization?
I do. And I'll go back to your Airbnb example. I enjoy using Airbnb, right? It's really easy to use. It's delightful. If it wasn't, I'd probably stick with it because I really, really want to get a place to stay overnight. But if it was really bad, I wouldn't use it at all. And I think about, when we're deploying these applications within the enterprise, you have to think about these applications not being used at all. I couldn't figure out Joyce's application, so I didn't use it. Then you get no value out of it whatsoever. And then this whole program that says, this is how we're building these new applications, automating things, making them better, it gets a black eye, right? So this is a big thing. Most organizations are going to start off wrong. They're going to make a bunch of mistakes, and it's going to really, really inhibit the ability for these things to actually drive value.
So what you're talking about there is an initiative that's probably part of like a bigger digital transformation, to, make processes more efficient, to make customer experiences better, something that's sort of like ladders up to this huge thing that most companies really care about, but is sort of failing somewhere down here. And then also could theoretically just be aimed at the wrong spot, which is something that design research is usually really helpful at. Like,
Right.
are we even really fixing the real problem? Are we fixing the reason why the experience is bad, or, this employee is wasting time or whatever? So it just, to me, it's almost like these details that really matter, that they're delivered and they're worked on in a different way than maybe most designers are thinking about.
I think they're coupled together. I think they're coupled, and I think it comes down to when I said you're going to turn the 5,000 speedboats in unison. That unison thing becomes really important, right? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? And design principles become really important in those high-level strategic decisions of what we're trying to achieve. And they should filter down all the way through all of the work. We're not allowed to say digital transformation apparently anymore.
Oh, we're not? That's out?
I don't know.
Are we on
AI made fun of
now? Are we on an AI transformation? Is that what we're doing?
Digital AI trip. As long as you AI wash it somewhere, you're fine. But yeah, your podcast will get a couple of people going, they talked about digital transformation.
I am owning it. I am owning it right now.
I'm owning it too, because I think there is this. I think this concept of digital transformation, we approached it. You and I discussed this one. We did a terrible job of it, right? We did a terrible job of it, and the job is ongoing. But this idea, you made a comment about, ultimately this stuff shows up in the customer experience, in the citizen experience, in the employee experience. That's what you're seeing, right? Whenever somebody says, I filled out the piece of paper and I dropped it on Sally's desk. We're in a hybrid environment now, and Sally doesn't come in until Thursday. So nothing's going to happen on this until Thursday. Or, or it's in a spreadsheet and it didn't pop up into Mark's email. Mark's not going to look at it for a while. This idea of bringing things up into a managed platform, this idea that your organization has this ugly operational model going on, this surfaces to your customers, and certainly it surfaces to your employees every day. And so this idea that how do we get out of that? Well, one of the things where digital transformation failed was we didn't scale it, right? It has to scale almost to the entirety of the organization. And your IT department can't build that much software, right? And cannot buy that much software. And so many of your processes are going to be unique to you as an organization that you have to have a world where business users are empowered to turn their speedboat in unison with everybody else's.
That's a great point. So, Rob, the next point I want to go to is actually I found an analysis of Caterpillar, the construction equipment manufacturer, and an analysis of their growth strategy and strategic investments from CB Insights. And I want to read you a couple things from there. So they're digitizing service information for customers and dealers through an upgraded cloud-based service information system, providing equipment management tools to help customers monitor assets, schedule service, and older parts. Connectivity of assets and fleet data is a major priority. Caterpillar notes they have 1.4 million connected assets, enabling them to collect more data to improve customer service. And then I think it just says e-commerce also, but I think we can all guess what that's about. Why is Caterpillar doing all of this stuff? What do you think their goals are? And do you think that this actually represents, is Caterpillar alone, or does this represent like a larger cohort that's maybe thinking about these kinds of things as a very non-traditionally software business?
I think Caterpillar is a software business. I think Caterpillar is, let's take a step back. Caterpillar is a very smart company, right? Caterpillar, in my experience, which is not extensive. I never worked for them, but I certainly have had the opportunity on occasion to work with them. They're a very smart company, right? So why are they doing this? They're doing this because their products are out in the world, and there is a fundamental disconnect with keeping those products at optimal performance, with making sure those products are in the right place at the right time. This is a very data intensive industry that they're in. And what is the cost of a Caterpillar machine being down for 2 days? It's massive, right? How do you differentiate by saying my product is less likely to be down because I've invested in a digital infrastructure that says all this ugly stuff that goes on behind the scenes, fill out the piece of paper, call somebody on the phone, make sure that you have the right person in the right place with the right part to get it fixed. Just thinking about it from a maintenance perspective, which I think is one of the most intriguing perspectives to get that back online, to optimize that process, to optimize the data associated with that process, and get that machine back online an hour earlier, let alone a day or two earlier, is a massive win for their customers and a massive win for Caterpillar. So, Caterpillar is a very smart company. I'm not surprised that they're doing it, but they're certainly not alone, right? Every smart organization is thinking in these terms, and every smart organization is realizing that in the depths of their processes behind the scenes are a whole bunch of ugly manual things that are not on a managed platform and not accessible to me in order to bring into a modern process.
Which requires applications, correct?
You got to bring everything. You got to get everybody who had a spreadsheet that was tracking parts. That has to be. I mean, I don't know if they do. Right? I don't even hate mail for
the aspiration. There's probably a slide.
But the
where
idea
they have
is that
all that on there.
they're trying to streamline this thing and bring everything online. That means everything needs to be brought up into a managed platform. A lot of those smaller processes are run by the people who really, really know them very, very well and have worked at that company and similar companies for a very, very long time.
Quote of the day, perhaps, in the depths of your processes, there are learning opportunities, maybe points of failure for all these sorts of businesses.
For years when we worked together, I had on my desk a piece of paper on which I had scrawled, "Your digital transformation strategy is exposing your ugly operational processes." So, it's like, the more we say digital and it's online, well, if Caterpillar really wants to do that, you have to bring everything online. You can't have an applicant. You can't have somebody who's out in the field with a mobile application that's absolutely beautiful that says pending or waiting for days at a time, right? So we have to bring all those operational processes onto line.
I mean, conversely, though, you also can't have them with an application that they can't use or they don't know what to do with, or that doesn't have a submit button where it needs to have a submit button.
Exactly. But that application, in my mind, that is a classic Figma application, right? That is something where if somebody's holding this device and they're working with a Caterpillar application, that's a hero app, right? That's an application that absolutely has to be done completely right. And to understand the circumstances and the context that people are working with it. Somewhere behind the scenes, there's something that's used for tracking parts or moving parts or some logistics application that is being used internally. That also needs to be a really good experience for the person working with it.
Rob, absolutely fascinating. Thanks for the perspective. Really enjoyed talking to you about this like I always do. Any final thoughts from being on FigBrew?
I wish we still worked together, because I think we're on the precipice of a lot of things working very differently between the design and the development world. I always loved talking to you about these things, and I think what's brewing now is really big. I don't know how it turns out, but I'm really hopeful that organizations like Figma play a part in it, because I think it's going to fail without the insights that you guys can bring.
Would you say it's big brewing?
Yeah, of course. What else would I say?
Bye, Rob. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.